the older generation, it's very rare to see them on maybe social media, on YouTube, sharing with us certain advices that they followed to make the money. So for me, I'm expecting the speaker for today to just open up and tell us everything that we need to know to make it in life. Yeah, you shouldn't hide anything from us.
Ah, that's nice. No, Selorm is not going to hide anything. Finally, no, two guys. I need a lady. I need a lady. You. What's your expectation? You're shy? Tell me. What's your expectation? Okay, I'll go for you. The girls, they don't want to. Okay, final person. Okay.
Learn from him and be successful in entrepreneurship and leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, okay. One more person, then we start. Okay. Yeah, one more person.
Just like the king, the lion is the king of the jungle. I believe Selorm is now more than a king, and is now in a kingdom. Yes, so I'm here to learn from a giant
in the kingdom.
In the kingdom.
Yeah. I'm sure that there are lots of questions going on through Selorm's mind at this moment, and thank you all for coming. Good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to today's Path of Purpose by Academic City University. It is a great privilege to see all of you gathered here, and we are excited to have you join us for this insightful discussion on the topic, Journey to the Boardroom. Right resource person. I will not take much of your time. Please help me welcome Dr. Sana Agboja, our Vice President Academics, to give us the welcome address.
So good afternoon, everyone. When I heard my... Yes, you got it. It's great. Again, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. And the president does send his apologies. He's indisposed at the moment, and so he can't be with us. But this session is actually something that was born from his office. And the reason was basically that we have conversations, we learn, we have our learning pillars, we try to make all of that happen. But if we don't have people come in here and actually share how they got to where they are for us to learn the paths that they walked on, it will be difficult for us to get there. And it's not just for students. Actually, I see it as something for us staff members as well. And we are all on this journey, this trajectory. We don't know where we are headed, but we are heading somewhere. And it's always great when we hear other stories. And I'm sure they also are on a journey, right? I'm sure, Selorm, if I ask him, where do you want to be in the next 10 years? He'll have a story for me, because there's somewhere that he's also aspiring towards. But he has been to places that we haven't been. And so is the case for other CEOs, etc., that we've had in this gathering. So it is really a great opportunity for us to learn from people who have walked the paths that we are aspiring to walk. And that is basically the essence of this. And today's session, I'm very excited about it, because not only is Selorm a person I would call a friend, but also a mentor. And actually, at one of the lowest points in my life, he was one of the people who held my hand and guided me through it. So it is. So it really is a pleasure to actually hear him. And sometimes, you meet people, you know them, but you don't know their story in full. You know bits and pieces of their stories. So I am particularly very excited to hear the story end to end and to see how else I can tap into this giant in the kingdom. And hopefully we'll be able to make our way into the kingdom as well. So welcome everyone, and I hope you have a great session.
Thank you, Dr. Sena, as we call you. At this moment, our president keep telling us a story back when he was in school about receiving such guests, Michael Jackson, and those kind of big names. And the things that he learned is what has brought him this far. And I believe that whatever Selorm is going to share with us here, it's going to be an experience that the normal classroom, what is this, won't give us. And so please make time to listen, ask questions. Selorm is here to answer all your questions. Selorm Adadevoh is the Group Chief Executive Officer of MTN Group, not Ghana, the entire group. Yeah, the entire group. Selorm was appointed to the role in April 2024 with a strong background in engineering and business. He brings over 2 decades of leadership experience in the telecommunication and digital finance sectors across emerging markets. Before his current position, Selorm served as the CEO of MTN Ghana from 2018, where he led the company through a period of significant growth and digital transformation. Selorm has also held key roles and executive positions within the Digicel Group, including CEO, Chief Operating Officer, and Global Director for Mobile Financial Services. His early career includes leadership roles at Millicom, also known or what we call Tigo then, now Airtel Tigo, where he served as the Chief Commercial Officer, Head of MFS, and Head of Product Innovation.
So in the MTN group, there are sub-companies where he also directs a lot of activities there. So we have a very big man here. With a unique blend of technical expertise and business acumen, Selorm is widely respected for driving innovation, expanding digital financial inclusion, and delivering sustainable business growth. Now from here, we are moving straight to our fireside conversation. And the person to drive this conversation is none other than, please, with a round of applause, help me welcome Dr. Adadevoh.
I think I'm supposed to invite you up as well, correct? Right, so if you will please join me, we can get started. Up to you. Just take a seat. Okay, are we good to go? Yes, right. Thank you very much. I should just say, when I was asked to moderate this session, I didn't even think twice. And I have a list of certain people that I've been wanting to meet. And on that list, Mr. Selorm, you were on there. So I was really pleased when, I saw you were coming to Academic City, and even happier when I now have the opportunity to moderate this Q&A. If you do have any questions as the conversations are ongoing, do please write them down. We'll take questions as we go along. Okay. I still consider myself young. as a young scientist, you first came on my radar when you got your Haiti appointment because there was publicity around that. And of course, with the name, you were obviously Ghanaian. And so that was what first caught my attention. And at that point, it was very clear you had been strategic with that move. So my first question to you would be of Ghanaian background, obviously, graduate starting off your career. As you were planning out what your future would look like, what are some of the key decisions that influenced the earlier choices you made right from school?
Thank you. And pleasure to meet you as well. And to meet everyone here, thank you for making the time. I'm hoping this is an interesting discussion for all of us, me inclusive, to learn from you guys as well. It's not, Haiti is not usually my first reference in any sort of discussion, but it's a good place to start. And maybe I'll tee back to my early career decisions, which were quite tough, I have to say. I mean, when I talk to my parents now, we had a lot of misunderstandings in career decision making. And, starting off from what I wanted to be, both my parents are doctors, right? So starting off what I wanted to be a doctor or become something else. And I decided to do engineering. I'm a civil engineer by training. I practiced very little of civil engineering, but I moved into data communications engineering after I graduated from civil engineering. My primary decision making, my earliest decision making was around how I wanted to see my own future, but within the context of where the world was going. So I had this whole vision that pretty much everything was going to be dictated by computers. And honestly, when I started my first civil engineering job in a company called Taylor Woodrow in the UK, I just didn't see how I could survive as a civil engineer without very strong computer knowledge and a foundation rooted in computers. So I had two options, right? One option was to learn about computers and its application in civil engineering, or to go deeper into computers and become part of the computer revolution. I chose the latter, and my primary reason was I felt if I acquired strong enough computer knowledge, I could apply it across different industries. And that gave me a lot of optionality in life, because everything from pharmaceuticals to business to agriculture to medicine, I mean, pretty much every field you could think about, I felt at the time would be influenced by this whole computer revolution that was going on. I graduated in 1998. So this was pre-millennium bug and all those other things that came along later on. So that was my primary decision making. Of course, I had this thought, but there was nothing to say that my thinking was the right one. And I also had a lot of issues trying to communicate this and convince my parents that the 4 or 5 years I'd spent learning civil engineering was not wasted, and that this was a viable career path for me at the time. So, this created a lot of issues with my dad and mom, thinking that I was not pursuing what I had studied. But obviously I had a vision that perhaps wasn't too clear to them, and today I believe it was the right decision in pivoting out of civil engineering into data communications. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Just a quick follow-on. Did you have a clear plan, or was it a case of, I'm going to try this and figure it out, or it was, I'm going to jump on the computer evolution and make it work?
Look, when you make decisions in life, I mean, one of the things that's most important is conviction, right? And, when I think back, I mean, at the time I was 22 or 23, I'm still not sure how I had such a strong conviction, but I did. I mean, I had zero doubt that computers were going to rule the world. And I'm not sure why I felt that way. I mean, we didn't have computers when I was at Tech. So, it was, I don't know where it came from, but I really believed in it. I had zero doubt, and I didn't even consider at the time the possibility that I was wrong. I never really thought about it. I just knew I had to do this, and I had to give it my 100%. So I went in, sort of head first, and I had to make it work. But to be honest, when you pick up the papers those days, out of every 10 jobs, 9.5 of them were about computers. There was nothing about, any other field. It was all about computers at the time. So I was pretty confident that I was making the right decision. I just went in, it had to work.
Okay. Follow-on question then. For the theme of today's session, strategic leadership and legacy. So for us young ones thinking, we keep hearing strategic leadership. It's quite embedded in what we do here at Academic City. But in practice, what does it mean? What does it look like? Break it down for us.
Look, it's a phrase that I've heard a lot, and I don't really proclaim that I understand it, but I'll tell you my view on strategic leadership. We sort of went from, basic leadership, and then on top of leadership, we added strategic. Look, when you work in the business world, you're always faced with decisions, right? And you can place decisions at 2 or 3 different layers in the hierarchy of decision making. The first one is a personal decision that just favors myself. I have an objective, and I make a quick decision on what that objective is. I can have a tactical decision, which is around how I execute on a particular thing, and this will be solving a particular problem or anything else, but I'm isolating my endeavor to a very narrow scope, and I really just want to get a particular outcome, and I'll call that sort of execution level decision making. Now, when you move beyond that, you get to another level, which in my case is called strategic. Now, what strategic does is you're offered a set of possibilities, right? And in as much as, and I'll give some very practical examples, in as much as an execution or a tactical solution may solve the problem, it may not be the most strategic, because ultimately, strategic means you have a much longer term view and a much broader scope that you consider, and your option set on making decisions also changes significantly. Now, this happens all the time. Now, let me give an example from when I was in MTN Ghana. So, got to MTN Ghana, and telecoms is a very capital-intensive industry where you spend millions of dollars every year expanding your network, improving your network. Over $200 million was spent almost every year in capital expenditure. You have a couple of options on how to spend $200 million, right? First of all, your primary objective is to grow the business. And you can grow a business in many ways. So when I looked at the way we're growing the business, I thought, okay, we can put sites outside of Accra, outside of the main cities where we don't have coverage. And then you get new customers coming into your network, which obviously will drive new usage and new growth. That's an option. Another option is you can say, well, you know what? The demand for telecom services in Accra or in our core cities has not been served, and therefore I should invest more in the core cities because there is latent demand, and that would also drive growth. But someone may argue, but what happens to the areas that are not currently served? A third may be a combination of this. I believed, we needed to focus on our core territories where we already had a presence, improve the quality of service or the experience within those areas so that the customers we already had were much happier. And once we're able to achieve that, we will consider new customers, right? So if you think of it as a medical center, imagine, we had a policy where our existing patients are all very unhappy, and all we care about is bringing in new patients. It would be a very, very poor experience for anyone. Just saying that I would treat the patients that are there, make sure they are fully recovered, and then I'll bring in more. That's a strategic decision. Both of them will get you to the outcome of growth, but one has different pros and cons, different benefits, and different medium to long-term implications for the business versus the other. And that's really where strategic leadership starts to come in. Because we can all be successful, and I'll use the example of Microsoft, another example. So Steve Ballmer, who you've probably forgotten, after Satya Nadella took over as the CEO of Microsoft, Steve Ballmer was quite a successful CEO of Microsoft, but he made a few strategic leadership mistakes, okay? If you look at his numbers, his performance, what his profitability was, what his revenue growth was, I mean, you could justify success. But when you think about his preparation for the future, he was clearly a failure. Because the world was moving from desktop computers and Windows operating systems into new sort of areas of growth, cloud computing, mobile operating systems. You can talk about search, for example. All these were new areas that arguably Microsoft could have taken a lead role in, but failed, right? We left search for Google. We left operating systems for Google again on Android and Apple. We left cloud for Amazon and whoever else came into cloud. So Microsoft at the time failed in seeing the vision of where the world was moving into and did not make the right strategic leadership decisions on how to prepare for that future. And honestly, if the change hadn't happened, Satya Nadella came in, technical background, understood the landscape of technology, and decided to accelerate Microsoft sort of foray into these new areas, made very different strategic leadership decisions to bring Microsoft back into now becoming one of the top 3 companies in the world again, when it fell off the chain very quickly many years ago. So to me, these are the types of things that characterize strategic leadership, where we have a much longer horizon, the scope and breadth of the decision making, where the decisions we're making much broader, and we're looking beyond the immediate impact of our decisions, but the medium to long-term impact that will effectively bring you a much larger business growth and business benefit. So.
Great. Excellent. Thanks for that. Okay, round of applause. The other thing I take away from the submission you've just made, so you get presented options. You need to be able to segregate into short-term, mid-term, long-term in strategic leadership. So that implies that your team are key to your success. So in our context, what do you look for in a team player if you're going to hire? For young graduates, early career professionals, etc., what would make us be on your team so we can present the right options to facilitate your decision making?
Thank you. Now, look, recruitment and bringing people onto your teams are quite a complex, it's quite a complex decision-making framework today because of the way the world is, right? But let me share some thoughts, and I'll share two thoughts that are quite different but get you to the same place. About 15 years ago, I joined Millicom, and during my first few weeks at Millicom, I had to build a new team from scratch. And I had the option of hiring experienced people into my team so that we can accelerate our growth, or bringing on young graduates and training them from scratch, because I wanted a certain type of mindset and a certain type of skill base within my team. I felt a graduate was a lot more malleable to new ideas and new ways of working than someone with a lot of experience. And the needs of the business at the time demanded that we work in a very specific way if we're going to be successful. We're the last to launch mobile money in Ghana. And I had this ambition to become number 1 within 2 years. And I thought, how do you do that if you're going to spend all your time debating ways of work? It's a lot easier to set your culture, set your ways of work, bring people in who can adapt to that, and then drive the business forward. So from that strategic thought process, the first thing I had to do was to say, look, I'm going to recruit from a pool of graduates who I could develop myself, which meant I needed to have a training program that will support them once they came in, and I can accelerate them from where they were into high productivity zones to help us achieve that target of number 1 in mobile money in 2 years. So that was a very different, again, I'm going to go back to your earlier question on strategic leadership, because I had to make certain decisions that I felt were peculiar to the particular situation I'd found myself in, but were also critical to helping me achieve success. The alternative could have been to go through a painful recruitment process, bring a lot of different people, interview, hire skills, whatever talents you have, all these things. That's more regular, but ultimately today we look for very different things. And depending on the stage of business you're in or the type of endeavor you're in, setting that criteria for what you need is extremely important. So that's the first thing. Most recently, I've had to build a team and I've had to expand my team. You're looking for someone who can adapt to the future needs of the world today. So very simple things like, I demand I demand efficiency at work, okay? So for example, I don't see why we should have a meeting today in 2025, June 2025, July now, and the summary of the meeting comes the next day. In fact, I can even be more aggressive and say, why can't it come before the meeting ends? Because we have the tools to make it happen, okay? So, and I was being generous by saying the next day. So when I'm hiring someone today, I'm saying, I want to spend time on things that are of high productivity. The things that are not of high productivity, I want to reduce the time demand on my team because there are tools that can do this. And if I'm not able to leverage those tools, then I'm inefficient, right? I'm reducing my productivity, I'm forcing the whole team down because I'm not insisting on some of these things. So that's what I do today. So I look for people who can adapt to the future, who can help productivity on the team go up. Now, what happens in a team is the people you have in the team influence each other. You can have the smartest people in the team. As soon as you bring one person that demonstrates unfairness in any aspect of the teamwork, it brings everybody down because people respond to that and say, well, if person B can get away with A, B, C, why am I putting in so much effort? So you bring everybody down. So in as much as the type of person you bring in is important, the dynamic of the team you're trying to create is even more important because that tells you what type of person to bring in. The attitude of the person is important. I would typically recruit for attitude as a big deal because the attitude helps you progress. Things are not static. You can come with all the skills you want. You're the greatest programmer of Python, so I'm happy about that. Or today I can build models in AI, I can do all of that. That's great, but tomorrow something else is going to come that's called BI. Can I transition from AI to BI? And if I don't have the propensity for that transition, then you're not as valuable even though your knowledge today may be the highest in the room. So those are the things I look for. Someone who's versatile, who can adapt and grow with the changing environment we're in. Someone who has the right attitude, who is able to respond to the needs of the business and build a more positive, productive team dynamic. Very important. And then the third one is ultimately, I honestly believe we all need to support each other and be empathetic. So I like development-minded individuals who can help each other. If someone is lacking in something, I go and support them. And that's the type of team dynamic I like to encourage on my team. So,
Okay, thanks. Keep writing down your questions. I'm going to digress with this one based on the response you've just given. You must have bad days where you don't feel like being efficient.
well, I don't feel
Like being efficient.
I don't feel like
You want to
being
switch
efficient.
off? No one should bother me today.
Okay.
Or do you not at the top? If you do, how do you deal with it?
No, I've never had one of those days.
You
I'm
don't?
always
Okay.
switched on.
No, it's when you get to the top, you don't have a luxury of bad days. Okay.
No, that's a bit of a joke. But honestly, and maybe again, this is sort of I've had tough days. I've had days when, sometimes you think about the work ahead and it does drain you. But I guess, my philosophy on life and my day at work is to reinforce positively. So somehow you have to find, I feel, and that's what I do, I have to find the energy somewhere. And I seek it out. I mean, I think it will be very difficult for anyone who's worked with me to easily, and it happens, but to easily point out when I am down. It's almost impossible to tell. And I'm not saying I didn't have bad days or down days. Internally, I did. But I deal with it with a very different outlook on life, and I go in buzzing like every other day. And we continue to go because your team pulls energy from you. So if you as a leader don't give off this aura of everything is fine and, you know, we can do it, confidence, encouragement, if you don't give that off, it pulls your team down. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be vulnerable. That's completely different, right? But you give your team energy, and somehow the way you show up, it's so important that if you keep just projecting, you know, negativity or down days or things like that, you will pull the team down. And it's a very dangerous place to be. So, I mean, you can be guaranteed, I get on stage and I will make it happen, you know. I walk into the office and I'm on a stage and it's showtime for the next 8 hours. Doesn't matter how low I am, you know. You dig deep and then you keep going.
Thanks for that. 100% sufficiency, people, all the time, all day, every day. Okay. So let's talk about reinvention, because you started off as a civil engineer. We talked about how you got to the first transition. So how do you manage reinventing yourself, and what helped you in that evolutionary process so you're evolving with purpose?
Okay, so by reinvention, you mean sort of my transitions from...
Yes.
Okay. So look, a lot of my journey has been fueled by my ambitions and what I want to become. But it's hard to know what you want to become too far ahead of yourself, right? When I started as a civil engineer and I thought this was not what I wanted to do, I wanted to get into computers, I found a way to get into computers. Then I got into computers and I said, what's the highest level I can get to in IT? And, you know, I started with desktop support, doing Microsoft certifications, and then I moved into data communications on the infrastructure side, working with Nokia and Nortel and Cisco. I did certifications in those. And then I just kept going, right? And I kept saying, you know, what's the most advanced level I can get to? I got to those levels, and then I started asking myself the question. I was working on a project at Vodafone in the UK at the time, and, you know, I was implementing something that I thought was quite innovative. And the question on my mind was, who was asking me to develop this solution, and how did they come up with the thinking on what was needed for the business? And I felt that I had enough experience and enough mind stretch that I should be in a position where I'm also telling my fellow engineers what to develop and what to focus on. And that's what piqued my interest in business. So I sought these people out. Now, it just didn't happen. I mean, there was some luck in it, but you create your own luck, because I wanted to meet the guys who were on the team that were telling us what to do. I was in the engineering team, and, you know, I wanted to meet the business guys. Then I met a guy called Florent Marquardt. It's a Belgian guy, and, you know, he was telling me how he got onto the project and what his role was, and what I needed to do if I wanted to join a team like his. I needed business knowledge. I needed to understand, you know, a few things, and he recommended that I could consider doing an MBA. Some of my other friends, you know, had already embarked on this journey, so I was familiar with what an MBA was, but I wasn't too familiar with it. So he actually helped me research with some sort of purpose on what this could do for my own career. And of course, with the help of my friends who were already on the journey, the tools, the knowledge to be able to embark on a transformation or transition from an engineer into a business person. And that's really what happened. But it was my desire to be making business decisions that involved technology innovation. And I felt that I'd reached a stage in technology where that was the next logical thing for me to do in terms of, you know, advancing my career, and I could take it to the next level. So that was that transition. Beyond that transition, it was always around Africa had always been important to me. And in fact, in my journey, I had, tried to do a few things on the continent, even when I was in the UK working. But I kept looking at the continent to say, how do I contribute to the development of Ghana and, other countries in Africa? So in pursuing an MBA, that was my primary objective. How do I acquire these skills? I wanted to be prepared, and I wanted to have a toolkit that allowed me to survive in many different types of environment. And I believe that I had the capacity to do it, but I had to go through the learning process to deepen my skills, my knowledge, and then apply it in a way that was most efficient. So that journey was very purposeful. I mean, I had a 3 to 5 year plan on where I wanted to be. I wanted to work in the US for 3 to 4, 5 years, and then come to Ghana or come to Africa somewhere, and that's what set me off. So a lot of my transitions have been fueled by my ambition and my medium to long-term goal at that particular point in time. But I don't look too far out. My horizon is usually a 5 year, maybe 6 year horizon, because I feel going too far out, I mean, this is very personal, right? Going too far out, it just makes it look very long. So 5 years works for me because it's reachable. I can have a 2 year milestone in that 5 year journey. And, that sort of allows me to be very intense on what I do to prepare for that stage of transitional change. So.
Okay. How much time do I have? I could be here all day. I told you he was on my list of people I must speak. We're good for time? Okay. I'm going to skip ahead to this question because it's a question I want the answer to. How critical is international exposure to getting into positions like yourself, especially where we have a young generation who perhaps finished their undergrad, and it seems the next step for almost everyone, the trend is finish undergrad, get an MSc outside the country, and that is how doors would open for you. Does it make a difference to, I suppose, the level of achievement you can on the continent? And you recruit, and you've been a global leader as well. You see a lot of people. Does it make a difference? And if it does, what is that difference? If it doesn't, for those of us who are still here, how do we have that short-term vision to aspire to those positions?
Look, this is a very debatable point, and there are varying perspectives on this, right? So let me start with the principles around, what preparedness for success in the corporate world looks like. To a large extent, it comes with a diversity of experiences and building your domain expertise to a point where someone places a certain type of value on, okay? Once you can achieve that, then your value attraction goes up and someone wants to employ you to deliver a job for them because they see potential in your ability to impact their business or whatever mission they have. But how do you get to that point where what you can offer someone is perceived to bring significant value? And this is where the diversity of experience comes in. I know a ton of people who haven't left anywhere and have been able to build the diversity of experience. The difference is how many people will have the opportunity for that experience in a different type of location. So if we take Ghana, for example, and we said, if I wanted to have experience in a $1 billion business in Ghana, there are 2 companies, okay? So that's your limitation. And for those who are engineering, I did this course, linear programming, when I was in school, and I never understood what it did. And then later on in life, I started realizing, this is quite important, because when I start to apply constraints on my decision-making, it starts to force me down a particular path. And you almost have this sense of correctness because I've applied constraints. So it's quite a powerful thing. But anyway, if I start to apply the constraints, the first thing is, how many opportunities can I get in this particular geography that allows me to be able to achieve this short to medium term objective of experience and exposure? And it's quite limited, or it can be quite limited. So by virtue of that, maybe there's 5%, 10% of this class that get that opportunity, and that's it. The 90% have to figure out an alternative. And this is what creates the competition for international exposure. That's one. The second one is the quality of the experience, right? So I got a chance to do an internship program in the UK when I was in school, when I was at Tech in my third year. And yes, I was doing binding and printing and all of that you do in an internship. But I also got exposure to, site work, I'll be carrying these files and following this engineer, but, I would see what's happening. I hear a few things that's happening. That's not really quality of experience for a third-year student. I'd rather be building something more tangible. And I could have had that experience in Ghana by working with a firm that was actually building something. So the quality of experience is not guaranteed, but you do have a bigger pie or a bigger option set when you go out, because you have a lot more companies, you have a lot more challenges, a lot more industries where you get challenges in the regular fields of business, finance, things like that. Now let's another field, completely different field like agriculture, which I'm a big fan of. And you start to say, I'm looking for purposeful experience in agriculture that can help me come back and impact my country or this continent. And you suddenly start to think, going out may not necessarily be the right decision, because you're not going to learn things that are directly relevant to our environment, or going out to certain specific types of places would make sense. Brazil will be one, for example, right? So you can make very purposeful decisions and say, what do I need to expand my exposure, my horizon, based on my medium to long-term, ambitions, and that will dictate where you go. But a lot of the time, there is this sort of superficial, attraction towards just leaving the country and going out because there is a status that it affords you, which is all influenced by us, because we put value on that, irrespective of these other two factors, quality, even the type of company. It's almost assumed that the fact that you went out is better than staying here. And for me, that's something we all need to put effort in to correct. I know a lot of people who haven't gone anywhere are doing fantastic, have built great businesses, have been super successful, and they now go out onto these big platforms and all these other places that I worked in to speak about what made them successful. So I think that's a perception and an illusion we need to influence through the work that we do. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that answer. Let's come to the intentional planning as well. How do you know when it's time to transition or move on or look for your next growth opportunity?
One of my mentees was asking me this question a few months back, and I wasn't sure what to say, because, I designed my career. If you look at my CV, you'd see that most of my jobs were 3 to 4 years, and then I transitioned. Now, I was very specific about where I wanted to be when, and I mapped it out in a way that allowed me to do that. But secondly, I had this whole concept of optionality and variability. I'm not even sure where it came from as a 22, 23-year-old. But in my mind somewhere, I wanted to create a set of experiences that allowed me to have optionality, being able to apply my skills to different industries. And variability, meaning within a particular industry, allow me to be able to play in different roles, whether it was marketing, finance, strategy, things like that, operations. So I basically designed my experience over time to afford me that. So today, I'm a chief commercial officer. Just a point of correction, he's a chief executive officer. My boss is the chief executive officer. I'm the chief commercial officer. But I could have been something else. And I sort of built my experience base in a way that allows me to be able to play multiple roles at different levels. And that's what I did. So my transitions were largely fueled on that goal to achieve those sort of broader set of experiences that I needed to define my path. Now, for everybody else, a lot depends. You have companies that are very different, that are dynamic. You get a new experience every day, every year, every other year. So you may be able to get the growth you need, the personal growth you need, by staying within those businesses because they afford you that. Other people are also not as ambitious, or they decide, look, you know what, I'm okay what I'm doing. There are other things I'm interested in that I want to spend my time on. I don't want to be learning something new every day that affects these other things that are very personal to me that I need time for. So your situation may be very different. Others may be 100% career driven to say, look, I just want to grow in this field, or I want to become the best in this field. I need to make sure that my current role and my transitions prepare me for that. So if you look at your personal situation, it would also influence how you think about when it's time to transition based on what you're trying to build. The one thing I will say is transitioning too early is always a risk. And when I interview people and they tell me how great they are because look at how many roles I've had, now, I'm one of those who had all those many roles, but it's a caution as well because, sometimes you end up in corporates where you have what they call sponsors, right? People who like you for whatever reason. It's not always objective. So they take you up the ladder very quickly. And then that becomes a marketing tool for you individually as a signal that you have gained a certain type of experience or recognition in your former company. But the foundations were not laid in terms of your knowledge base and your skill set and your experience. So you come into a new company, and then all of a sudden you're exposed because you know what? The person who was shielding you is no longer there, and you're completely exposed. I'm big on authenticity, whether it's to do with your character, whether it's to do with your value system, whether it's to do with your skills. So you need to be able to tell yourself that you're actually ready for a transition. And there is a readiness test that we all have to do to say, look, you know what, I've solidified this layer in terms of grounding my knowledge base, my skills, and based on that, I'm ready for the next thing. That's ultimately the right test for when it's time to transition. A lot of people would use, I've done X, I've done Y, I've done Z. But what they don't say is, while I was doing X, Y, and Z, there were A, B, and C that I had no idea about because I just couldn't visualize that they existed. And therefore, I've missed 50% of the opportunity. But in my mind, because I've done X, Y, and Z, I'm ready for the next transition. And it's not always the case. And a lot of my mentees, I have to walk them through that. I ask them, I say, look, you've been in this role for 8 years. They're like, I'm done. I've done everything I can do in the role. And I ask them a very simple question, and we unlock a lot of things they could have been doing the 8 years. Effectively, they wasted half of the 8 years because in their mind, they were ready, they were experts, and they were self-proclaimed experts, and therefore they became blind to what was in front of them. And they wasted 4 years because they just, they got too arrogant, too short-sighted, and they didn't realize what was ahead of them and what the opportunity around them was. And I say this all the time. We all have a lot of opportunity around us, but very few of us will actually see those opportunities and take them. The rest of us will be blind to the opportunities because we're too consumed in ourselves. And this happens sometimes. So,
great. There are 2 questions that have been pre-submitted, so I'll ask those next, and then I'll open the floor if anyone has any other questions before I go back to my very long list of questions. Okay, so first question, 1 out of 2. Can you describe some of the most challenging leadership decisions you have faced at MTN as CEO?
Whew. Quite a lot. Quite a lot of decisions. Look, maybe I should give one very specific one, which was on communication services tax. So in 2019, we were faced with a situation where the government wanted to increase the communications service tax. Now, the history of this was in 2011, when communication services tax was introduced, it was introduced as a consumer tax. But the telcos unanimously decided to absorb it because they didn't want to pass it on to consumers, right? So note that, because that's a very important decision that was made at that time. And the conditions in the industry and environment supported that that was the right decision to make. When you fast forward 10 years down the line, you now have created precedents for a decision that was justified at the time, but now welcomes new taxes to be treated the same way. So there's a feeling that if I impose a new tax or I increase this tax, that it should be absorbed by the telcos. But what has changed from 2011 to 2023, 2024, the economics of the business has changed completely. At the time, the number of people with mobile phones were very low. So all the telcos were growing significantly. So you can comfortably absorb a tax intended for the customer and make it a business burden. But now, things are different. We're reaching saturation. We have 140% penetration of SIMs. So you don't have that much room for growth anymore, and therefore your decision-making criteria and conditions very different, and you would make different decisions. So we were tasked with this. I was the chairman of the telecoms chamber at the time, and we had to make a decision on how we treat this increment from 6% to 9%. And I was of the view that we needed to correct the precedent because everything around us today or at the time had changed, and there was no longer a reason to continue to absorb the tax. But this would not have come up if government had not embarked on the increase of 50% on this tax. We would have continued to absorb it. So we did make a decision, understanding the ramifications, okay? The ramifications obviously being that government was going to see you as creating a negative sentiment against government from customers, because customers were now going to see that they were being deducted a certain amount of tax on every airtime purchase they made. But that was the right thing to do because that's what the tax was intended to do. And in fact, when the Revenue Authority calculates a tax, that's the same basis by which the Revenue Authority calculates the tax. So we're just honoring what's already done, okay? But politics is a very difficult thing because politics is about populism, right? I need to please everybody in this room, otherwise I don't get my vote. And it's a very dangerous, I guess, variable to apply in business decision-making because businesses are all about economic value and everything and sustainability. So you can't apply a political principle to a business and expect sustainability to happen in the long run. It's a very dangerous thing. And therefore, there will always be this tension between the political motive versus the business imperative. These are two completely different things. So this was a decision we had to make, understanding that this was going to make government look bad, and we could end up in a very difficult situation as a business. But your dilemma is, do I do the right thing and correct the precedent? That's no longer sustainable. Or do I continue as per practice and create a risk of unsustainability for my business medium term to long term? That's the decision we had to make. I'm sure you can guess what decision I made. It was to do the right thing and suffer the ramifications. So, I'll
You'll
leave
be
it
pleased
as
to
that.
know. Question number 2 said, what key lessons did you learn from those experiences?
Look, we suffered a lot after that. There are a lot of things happened beyond that. But if I look back and I had to do this again, I really don't think my decision-making, knowing what I went through now, I don't think my decision-making will change. Perhaps the way we managed that overall situation could have been better to limit the ramifications afterwards. So there's something to be learned around how you manage a situation, right? Just the fact that your decision is the right one doesn't mean the approach you adopted is the right one. And every time we do things, we tend to focus on right and wrong, and that's not the way to think about it, because it's not always about right or wrong, right? A lot of the times it's about the approach. How do you socialize your ideas? How do you get people to back you? How do you deal with the points of contention up front so that you minimize the implications later on? These are all things we can do in how we manage a process. And for me, my experience at MTN has taught me a lot about how to manage those types of situations. I mean, I hadn't faced this number of challenges in my entire life than I did in my 6 years leading MTN Ghana. So, a wealth of experience, and I'm grateful for that. And hopefully, I'm a much better person today as a result of that as well. But at the same time, I think we made very strong decisions that allowed the business's sustainable future to be at minimal risk. And those things will continue every day. So,
great. Clearly it was the right one, because you're still on the up climb, right? After that. Okay, questions to the audience.
I'm sure a lot were. Okay, you. But before that, I want to ask my question first. Yes. Selorm, I want to find out, why is it that a lot of local businesses struggle to expand to the international market, looking at where you sit?
Okay. Look, that's a very complex question, but let me tell you what I believe, and so my beliefs are very strong on this one. Nothing happens by chance, okay? Let's take India, for example. 1947, India decided, I'm going to spend 30 or so years transforming my country, and they had a 30-year plan, maybe it was a 20-year plan that got extended, but they had a long-term plan on reducing the level of importation and creating a basis for exportation. It was a strategic investment at the political level. It was purposeful. It was something everyone committed to, and they put in what was necessary to build a country that today exports a lot more than they import. And there are several countries. You can go to China, and it's exactly the same thing. Now,
We'll come back to businesses, and it's exactly the same. The conditions for exportation have to be enabled for first of all, for that to be possible. Now, what are the conditions? Let's just take one district, one factory as an example, okay? Now, you build a factory in each district nationwide. To get goods from the factories to the ports to export means you need to build as many export-friendly roads or infrastructure as you have districts, okay? What does that do? It increases the cost of production overall because there are no synergies. If you look at countries that have done well economically in exportation, they typically will have industrial zones that leverage synergies. You literally build a city, you have labor, you have infrastructure, you have access
to lower cost of production. The second one is using other methods to reduce your cost of production. This is what countries like Brazil have done in terms of their technology enablement, okay? Today, Nigeria imports 1-point-something billion tons of salt from Brazil, when the sub-region produces about 500 million tons of salt, and they could have imported from all these countries. But why did they go to Brazil? Because I can deliver the salt FOB at less than 50% the cost to deliver it from Ghana, or from Senegal, or whatever other countries you have in the region. So economically, we're just not there. It's not an emotional decision because Ghana is close to Nigeria, they have to buy salt from us. At the end of the day, if they're paying 50% more, it's uneconomical to their country to do that. But how do we get the cost of salt down so that we can export to Nigeria? We have to solve our land tenure issues, because our land tenure issues force us to be small-scale salt farmers, which means, again, we don't leverage our synergies, no economies of scale, cost of production, old technologies don't make sense, because if I try to invest in leading technology, it will cost me too much for half an acre of land. But if I had 50 acres of land mining salt or producing salt, then the technology makes sense because of the scale I have. So there are a variety of problems. But the first thing is, as a nation, if this is something we want to do, and we're bold enough to take the steps and make the decisions that are required, we will start to create these environments that allow these things to happen. And we'll start off with zoning a place and saying, Cape Coast, Tekradi will be the tourist area. So any land I sell has to be going towards something to do with tourism. I'm going to zone some part of the eastern region that becomes the economic productivity area, factories, manufacturing plants. I build highways to the ports. I build waterway and water transportation to the ports so that I can reduce the cost of production and I can enable development to continue. That's how we will achieve that. We can't do it the way we're doing it because we just don't have the scale. If you think about the global markets, again, Ghana is 33, 35 million people. The global markets, billions of people. So to serve the global market, scale is important, right? Guaranteeing that you can produce consistently to serve that market is also equally important. So your supply chain has to be guaranteed. And again, we have all these inconsistencies in very basic things that we do that limit our propensity to be attractive to those markets. And I know companies that are selling things like pineapples to Marks and Spencer in the UK. They started in Ghana and it was working well. And today, those companies have expanded to build farms in Latin America and other places. One, because we don't produce pineapples the whole year through, and they need to guarantee supply every month of the year, but also because you need to increase your productive levels to meet the demand, the growing demand for the product. So there are a number of things we need to really think about. I think Brazil is a fantastic market for us to study. India is another one for us to study as a nation on how they built this export base across different things. India is mainly skills and IT, which is how they started, but they've moved into other areas as well. Brazil is a lot of heavy agriculture and manufacturing. Turkey is in manufacturing now and exporting those. So a lot of markets are becoming a lot better, but these are strategic decisions that have been made, and the environments have been prepared for that to be sustainable. So,
a round of applause for Selorm. Thank you very much. So I'm coming to you. Please make your question very brief and make sure you ask only one question. Please. I beg you. Thank you.
Thank you, MC, and thank you, Mr. Facilitator, for coming. My question is, you had a very self-directed, where you were going. But in many cases, we don't know where we want to go. So that becomes a challenge. So I want to ask, how do we do an introspection to know the future we want to create? How do we do an introspection to know that this career trajectory is what I have the potential? Because anything that you don't have the skill set to do it, you fumble. So clearly in your own way, because you have a strong ambition, you see that you are flourishing from one career leadership to another. But in most cases, we are confused. We don't know which path to take. And when you are in the wrong path, you cannot navigate your way. You cannot find the leverage, and you'll be stuck. So I want you to give us skills that we can find out to see which career track path is the right one for us. Thank you.
Selorm, I'll take two in addition, then you answer the three questions together, right?
I hope you remember them. Thank you.
Or do you want to go one after the other?
You can bring another one, but I can't remember three questions, but it's
okay,
fine.
I'll do two. All right.
Yeah.
Selorm, thank you for your sincerity. I've learned there's a difference between optionality and variability. I would like to find out, I believe the environment in which you grew has made you to be able to always plan, because I hear you say plan, and giving you those options to be able to think of what do I want to do. What books would you recommend that we read? And would you consider being president in the future of Ghana? If not that position, which one?
If not what?
If not being president, which one?
Oh, which one? Okay. Yeah. All right. Let me take these two questions, and I remember some years back I put my favorite books onto a slide. I would try to find it. I will send that to Dr. Senna, and she can get it to you guys. Maybe there are some additional ones that will make more sense today, but there are some books that I live and swear by, so I'll share that. In terms of what I want to become, I honestly haven't considered president as an ambition today. Now look, let's break it down, right? Ultimately, I've always believed that I have two purposes in life. One of them is to be the voice for those without a voice. And in any environment I find myself, I make sure that those without a voice are heard. I can take what someone is trying to say and I can help them say it on their behalf. But I represent people who cannot speak for themselves. And, this is deeply rooted in things that happened, in my own life at a very early stage, before I was 6 or 7. But we won't go into that. The second one is that my second purpose in life, I believe, is that I should apply my talents and my abilities to my country and to my continent, okay? There are ways to do it without becoming the president. Of course, the president has certain powers that the ordinary businessman may not have. But therein lies a big conundrum. Because in this country, the significant part of our GDP is tied to the government. Most developed countries is the exact opposite. So at what point is Ghana going to get to a point of stability and diversification so that what happens within the government instrument is not as critical to our economic fortunes as they are today? So if the only way to impact this country is to become the president or a politician, then we will never grow this country to stand on its own or have the foundations of economic stability that's required. So I have desires to have an impact. I believe the private sector is the right instrument to do that. I'm an investor in different types of industries. I believe those things allow growth and allow us to get to that next stage. But I would like to see this disaggregation of the largest spender in this country being government to the largest spender in this country being the private sector, the SMEs, a mix of that. And if we can achieve that, then our journey to economic prosperity is actually only just starting. Without that, we're stuck. We have to make it happen. Who's going to make it happen, right? I mean, you can make it happen. You're young enough to have 40 years of work to make it happen, right? But it's on us to decide that we will drive transformation through our individual efforts that come together collectively to make the impact that we needed to make. But if we don't start thinking that way, then we're all just going to become party players, finding money to fund ourselves so that we can become the next minister and that's it. But we need a productive instrument to drive sustainable economic growth. And that comes from manufacturing, producing what we consume locally, exporting the excess, and creating an economic balance that goes the other way. Today, it's very different, right? To the first question, which is around, you made a statement that was a big assumption that I knew where I was going. I didn't know where I was going, right? It takes effort to know where you want to go. It takes research. It takes talking to people. It takes introspecting and thinking about yourself in a very honest way and figuring out what interests you, what you're capable of doing. I've done a lot of things that I had zero interest in. But I knew that if I cross the next stage, I get to a point where things become more interesting for me. So you have to be ready for that discomfort. I make a joke all the time. When I got into management consulting, all my friends, all my colleagues in consulting were very good at, building models, analyzing things. There are X number of models you can build: financial models, marketing models, competitor models, all different types of models. I couldn't build a single one, and I was in this company. And people 2 levels below me, that was the foundational skill set you had to have, okay? So I was clearly in trouble. I had to learn this thing. And I remember taking models people had built, studying them at night over the weekends, building them myself. The first time I tried to build a model, I was on this thing for months, okay? And then I managed to get to weeks, and I managed to get to days, and I was getting better and better. But it took a lot of effort. I guess the point I'm making is you will never know if you're not willing to put in the effort, right? You meet people all the time. If you really know what questions you haven't answered yourself, then when you meet someone, you have a purpose to answer those questions. But a lot of us, we sort of arrive, we arrive at things and somehow we expect things to happen for us. It doesn't happen that way. You have to create your own opportunity. You have to create your luck. You have to create your opportunity. And sometimes even reading about the person and figuring out what's relevant for you to ask. These are all things we need to do more of. I mean, I don't go to a conference and just hang around and hope I meet somebody who can help me. No, I'm figuring out who's coming, what topics are there, what do I need answered. And I'm going there with 4 or 5 things that I need to come back with. And I'm making sure that when I meet someone, I'm focused on the 5 or 6 things that I need answered. Otherwise, you're going to be swayed by all the other things everybody else wants to talk about that may or may not be relevant to you. So I guess my message to you is to say, you need to start putting some structure around how you think about your future. It's never going to happen if you don't put in some time and some structure. Then the second thing is to be very honest about where you are, what you have, and what gaps you need to fill. And then the third thing is to be ready mentally to go through some pain, because that's what it's going to take. I mean, I didn't just arrive at Vodafone one day and I got a job there. No, right? I actually wanted to work at a certain level of technology development, and I figured out which company should I target to get me there. But once I did that, I also figured out what does it take to get into those companies, and I started doing the work for that. But I didn't just wake up one day and from somewhere I figured out these were the things I had to do. No, I went through a process of talking to people, trying to refine my own thinking about where I wanted to go, understanding where technology was going. And again, that was a bit of a leap of faith, but I had read enough, talked to enough people that I believed and had convinced myself that it was worth the leap of faith. And I took that leap of faith. So there's a lot of work to be done to get to that point. I don't think anyone with certainty just wakes up and has certainty. You put a lot of work in to get to a point of certainty. So
that's great. A round of applause for Selorm. Okay.
What would you have done or wouldn't have done when you were younger that would have accelerated your growth more than now? That's all.
Another? Would you want to go ahead?
Another one.
All right.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. So I want to find out what was the turning point in your career that shaped your mindset on leadership? At what point did you see leadership as not just like a role, but actual responsibility? If you could share that.
Okay. I'm trying to remember the first question again, which was around.
What would you have done?
Sure, what would I have done differently? Yeah, thank you. Look, I always say, I was asked a question once by a journalist, and the question was, do I have any regrets in life? And my response was no. And the journalist was quite surprised because, I mean, we go through these moments of reflection. You know, some of us do it every year and we have resolutions forward because we did things that were not good or we failed in different things. But my philosophy on life is you don't become the person you are by skipping certain things. So I am the person I am today because of what I've been through. So by undoing those things, which may have been painful, I would also undo things that have made me the person I am today. And that's why I don't ascribe to regret. Okay? Are there things I could have done differently? Absolutely, I could have done things differently. But we have to take it in our stride because, like I said, I mean, the set of conditions around you on a daily basis are changing. And you make your decisions based on your limitations of knowledge, understanding, exposure, experience. And then, as you continue to build those experiences and exposure, you refine your decision making. So how do you skip the step? Even for someone who doesn't believe, I mean, I did in my children today. Sometimes you tell them something and they just don't believe it. And we talk here about experiential learning. What's the whole philosophy of experiential? Experiential learning is all about do it and learn it, because sometimes you just have to do it. Without that, there's no way to reinforce it. It still lingers in your mind in disbelief, right? But your convictions are based on a level of confidence, and that confidence comes from what you've experienced. So, I mean, I don't think I would change anything. Could my career have been shorter? Absolutely. I mean, I spent a lot of time in technology, which someone would say, well, if you're going to end up in business, maybe you didn't need to spend that time in technology. But today I'm leading a technology business, and my technology foundation has been instrumental in my success as a business leader. So if I shortened, sort of that time in technology, maybe I wouldn't be as strong in business as I am today. So, it's hard to sort of take away your past experiences and say, I would have done it differently. The one thing I would say, though, are the opportunities I wish I had when I was younger. One of which is exactly this. Okay, I didn't get the chance to talk to many people in industry about what was possible. I didn't have that opportunity. I had to create it myself. Now, that could have changed my direction at a very early stage in life. I'm not sure. But what we don't put a lot of value on is what people can tell you and can share with you about what they've been through. And what that means for you as individuals is extremely important. I said to someone once that, we all have the same opportunities. But even in this room, just like my friend, Elikem Kwenye here, he told me this in 2003, where he said that he wanted to dedicate his life to the continent. And therefore, he quit his job in New York, was unemployed for about a year or so, because he had decided that he wanted his life to impact the continent. He ended up being one of the starters of what is now today UBA Bank in Ghana. And then he also went on to set up a legal firm called Oxford & Bowman that he then sold to one of the largest legal firms on the continent called TNS. Is it TNS? I can't remember the name now, but ENS, I'm sorry, ENS. So I cite this because, again, he had conviction, right? And conviction gives you that internal energy to overcome the obstacles that are in your path. A lot of us, the reason we don't succeed is we're not able to overcome those obstacles because things have to be easy for us. And that expectation that things have to be easy prevents us from going through that rough patch and coming out successful at the end. And a lot of people have done this. So it's a rite of passage, unfortunately, for most of us. Some people, don't have to do it, but you always have to know where you're coming from and figure out that your path doesn't have to be the same as someone else's. And if mine requires that I go through a rough patch, that's what it is. That's my path. I have to accept it and I have to get through it. I can't do it any other way because that's my path, right? The second question was on
leadership.
Say it again.
Leadership.
On leadership.
Your turning point.
Yeah. So, and again, can I debate the question? Because a turning point makes it feel as if you were going the wrong way and you have to turn around. It doesn't always happen that way. I think sometimes it's. Look, I was in leadership roles when I was in secondary school. I was in leadership roles when I was in university. So I don't know whether there was a turning point per se. I think I had always, maybe there was something in me that wanted to lead, that was natural, that I groomed and developed in as I gained more exposure and experience. But I always had my own ideas about how things should work. I also always had ambitions that were usually seen as odd, not achievable, a little out there. You always had people in class who you felt were not normal because, when I said I wanted to do an internship in the UK my third year in university, people thought, civil engineer, Asafo Boache, Contera, these are all places you can work at. Why is he sending all these letters to companies in the UK? And, I've always taken on things that may seem a little bit more difficult to achieve, but because I believe in something, I keep going. And more often than not, it happens. So for me, leadership is exactly the same thing. I started taking on small roles. I figured I had something I could build on and started building on it. Did I ever get to a point where I thought about leadership and made a decision? No, I just kept evolving. And today, a lot of what I talk about as my leadership journey are based on reflection, as opposed to me making very specific decisions about my leadership when I was going through those journeys. So my reflections are that, you have to try things. You have to learn to work. I've evolved a lot as a leader, how to bring other people in, how to not make it only about myself, how to be comfortable for other people to be in the limelight and not necessarily me, be able to acknowledge other people's works, even if I'm the leader. All these things are things you build as you go along, because it's difficult sometimes, right? A lot of people want it to be about themselves, right? Even if you had the idea, they have to let the whole world know it was my idea. It wasn't his idea, and it wasn't your idea. So these are all things we need to evolve out of, and a lot of it comes from experience and just growing. So I would say give yourself the opportunity. You're in a great institution. I'm sure there'll be a lot of leadership opportunities here that you can take. And if you take that, even when I was in ICU in 2021, this is a funny story, but it was a serious situation. I became the ICU prefect because, people were not taking leadership. I had to tell the nurses what to do, how to run the operations. And I was sick in the ICU, but, I just saw that things were just not right. And if I didn't intervene and try to push, we lost 40, 50% of the people in the ICU, but this was during COVID. We could have lost a lot more. So I intervened, and I put something in place to help the other patients in the ICU. So it's something that I orient to quite naturally, but over time I've evolved and I've developed, and I continue to develop as well. So
That's a great one. Round of applause for him, please. So 3 more. I'm taking the first 2 here. I'll go to the back, then I'll be done. Afterwards, you can have a one-on-one with Selorm because of time, please. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Please, I would like to know the readiness test you mentioned during your presentation, the readiness test before you embark on a transition.
Oh, the readiness?
Yes. Like, okay. Yeah.
Then, okay, Mr.
Okay, thank you very much. It's been very insightful. My question is, how do you deal with the boardroom misalignment? I asked this hinge on something I heard from Mr. Kofi Amoabi in UT Bank. He said that at some point, he had a vision where he was taking his business, but you go to a meeting, and because it was not open up for shares and all that, you had a team of people who are supposed to take a decision on behalf of the business, and you could tell this wouldn't be good, but then you had to go with it. How do you deal with those? We know with the politicians it's quite different. You could be kicked out, but it can't be in your case.
Very good question, very advanced question as well. Thank you. Look, let me start with the readiness test, which is, so there is no real test. I just called it that. But what I meant was, when I'm going through a transition, I'm very big on establishing a level of competency in the role or the job that I'm pursuing at the time, right? Now you can think of this on a scale of 0 to 10 to say, I need to get to a level of proficiency at about level 8. I push myself very hard, and I keep very high standards of work. I do that because it's my belief that the one thing I control and I can differentiate myself on is the quality that I bring to anything I work on. So throughout my career, this has been extremely important to me. So if I'm in a role where I'm struggling a little bit to achieve a certain level of competency, a certain level of speed in my delivery, it means to me, I'm not ready. Now, this standard may be different for other people. The second thing I do is, I've always said that if you're a visionary leader, which is what I try to be, when you start the journey of being a visionary leader, you have a lot of things you want to do. At some point, the things you want to do should become business as usual, where people are doing it now subconsciously because it's become the culture, it's become the way of work. So you've achieved a certain level of stability, you've achieved a certain level of transformation that allows the things you wanted to do to continue even beyond your time in that role. That's the second one. The third one is you no longer see the growth opportunities ahead of you. Now, this is very subjective, and this is where it gets very tricky, because a lot of people jump and go to point number 3 and say, I've learned everything I can learn in this role, and I have nothing else to learn. But their horizon for assessing I have learned everything else is very small and narrow. And therefore, in fact, there's a lot outside of that circle that they haven't learned, that they are not even aware of because they've narrowed their scope. So that's the third one that I use to try to figure out what to do. And usually there's a fourth one, which is also around the level of effort and ease with which you deliver a good quality outcome. At some point, if it becomes too easy to deliver on things, then you know it's time to shift, because you know what? You're probably operating at your most optimal level in that job, and there's no stretch at this stage, and you need to start to think about something else. So those would be the 4 things. Maybe there's a 5th one, but we'll leave it at 4 for now, right? Boardroom drama, which is a summary of your question. Very tricky. Very tricky. Now, if I think about the boards I'm on, I was on the board of a bank some years back, and we had to make a ton of different decisions. What was happening with the bank was we went through the whole recapitalization process, and Bank of Ghana needed us to step up our capital base. Now, that meant you had to bring new capital into the bank for the bank to be, a going concern, which is, to continue to be a company and comply with the regulations. We had different views, right? Especially when you think about putting money into a bank, the first question is, what value is this money going to create over the next few years so that I can get the chance to earn dividends, to earn my money back? The whole point of investing is to get it back. And there were serious questions about the bank's strategy, the bank's ability to execute, and why we needed to put more money in. Now, if you take the different interests of the board, the majority shareholder on the board, because they've put in so much money to be the majority shareholder, their interest is very different from a minority shareholder. And you need to understand that on a board, different members of the board have different interests. The majority shareholder needs someone else to put money in because they've already put a lot of money in, and the bank has some frailties and maybe some question marks around its strategic sustainability, right? The minority shareholder is saying, look, you know what, I haven't put too much money in, not so much is at risk, this is my time to jump. So with these two varying views, it's very difficult to expect the majority shareholder to bring in more capital into this bank. Now, without the minority shareholder bringing more capital, the majority is also going to say, well, I've put enough money in the bank already, so I don't need to put money in. And this stalemate can basically bring the bank down because you end up not meeting the Bank of Ghana requirements. And this is exactly what happened, okay? Nobody was willing to put capital in. One of the investors was from Denmark, one was from Norway, and they didn't want to put money in anymore. They felt, look, let's cut our losses and let's move. But that's an interest. Someone else's interest, which was, a community association that was invested in, it was a women's group that had come together to invest. Their interest was wanted to create an opportunity for women to be able to bank and have access to credit. So now, for them, we should all put money in because they're not so focused on generating a return tomorrow. Their purpose goes beyond your P&L, right? It's a little bit more emotional. Let's support women, make sure they can borrow, and everything else will be fine after that. So to manage the different interests as a CEO, ultimately, if the bank goes down because your board directors and shareholders are not, I'm mixing board and shareholders in this case, are not necessarily seeking to invest, your job is to build the rationale and the investment case for them to do so. And it takes starting with what each person's interest is. And you can use this for any type of board situation because each board member has a different interest. And ultimately, without understanding their interest, you're not able to position your argument or your proposal to them in the right way. And that's where it starts. But you would always have different interests on the board because your shareholder views are completely different. Your expectations of the business are completely different. And as a CEO, you have to keep managing that dynamic and build the right level of confidence so that what you put on the table is supported and also it's positioned in the right way for you to get the support. It's a tough job. And I don't envy CEOs at all.
Wow. A round of applause for him. Final question, then we call it a day.
So I want to commend the university for this. I think it's highly impactful. So for context, I came here with my two daughters. One is 15, one is 17. One just finished the O-level, the other is preparing for A-levels. On the topic, journey to the boardroom, strategic leadership and legacy. Selorm, if you could summarize what would you tell your 15-year-old and a 17-year-old daughter as to how they craft their pathway around the topic, their strategic journey to the boardroom? How would you summarize that to your 15 and a 17-year-old? And by extension, to all the students here who I believe also have the same or need that same inspiration to get to where they want to get to. Thank you.
So that's all. I'm taking only one question. Or Selorm, you want me to add one more? If you want me to, I will, because there are lots of...
I wanted to say a few ladies have their hands down.
Felix.
A few ladies have
Oh, yeah. Pardon me, please. Pardon me. Okay.
Thank you so much. I was telling my friend here that I like your level of composure with all the questions that are coming. There's very little emotions in how you listen to and respond to the questions. I aspire to be like that one day. But my question is, you spoke about joining a team and having the opportunity to recruit your own staff or people you want to work with the level of expertise and proactiveness that you need. How do you manage having a team already picked out for you that doesn't have your level of proactivity and you are not at liberty to replace them? How do you manage? Because you have to. Think about being the leader in this case and find a way to pull everyone else on the team to be on their toes so much that the deadness is not coming back on you, but it's reflecting well on the team. How do you manage that?
That's it.
Okay. Let me take the first question and come back to the second question. The second question is quite a loaded question and a tricky one as well, but I'll give an example that I think answers that question well. So look, to the first one, what would I tell a 15-year-old, 17-year-old about the journey to the boardroom, strategic leadership, and legacy? Let me start by debunking the topic, because I'm always asked, what will my legacy be? Say again? Okay, so let me debunk that first. It's a question that I don't quite like, but I don't like the question because I've always felt that, by defining your legacy, you're making it about you, right? And this is my disconnect with the question, okay? And I'm sure there'll be a lot of debates about this. So when I was leaving MTN, I was asked the question, Selorm, what's your legacy going to be? And I said, I have no idea, right? I came in with a pure mind, a pure heart. I knew what impact I wanted to have, and that's what I'm pursuing. Now, does that translate into a legacy? It doesn't always translate into a legacy. But a legacy is what stays behind after you've left, right? Some people will build a new building, name it after themselves, and that's their legacy because they built this new building. Someone will say something else. So for me, personally, I don't see a lot of value in those things. For me, a legacy is something that takes people from one stage of their life to another. And if it's an institution, it takes an institution from one stage to another. Legacies to me are things around culture, around the way we work, and around the mindset that you leave people with. Because with that, you can create many more wins, many more successes, and a lot more things will come out of it. So let me give an example. If someone said to my 15-year-old or 17-year-old and said, what do you want to be in the future? Versus, let me build into this 15-year-old and 17-year-old the mindset to withstand the challenges of life ahead of them. Telling me that in life, you're going to have situations where you're going to fail. And those points in your life are tests on your resolve, tests of your character, of your strength, and you need to recognize them as such. Okay? So it doesn't matter which path you take. You're always going to have certain types of challenges, and some of them can be so significant that you want to give up. But I'm telling you today that that's one of the tests you need to overcome to earn your stripes as a potential leader in life. Now, that gives that young person positive motivation in a very bad situation. And this is what sometimes we miss, because we create this expectation that if you do A, B, C, D, things will happen for you in life. But life doesn't work that way. You can do A, B, C, D, but you can still hit a roadblock. You can still fall into a ditch. Things can happen. So personally for me, the preparation for a young person is not so much the boardroom, but it's to define who they are going to be in that world that they are stepping into, and what sort of depth of character they can get into to overcome the challenges that they're going to be going through, because it doesn't matter which path you take, you would have them. That's the first thing. The second thing is, no matter what your ambition is at 15, 17, you would have to have a process where you reconfirm and recheck every few years. And we all need a certain degree of flexibility to make it in life. And sometimes what happens, I've seen relatives of mine or friends of mine who were so fixated on one particular thing that even when they had done everything possible and it still wasn't working, they couldn't shift. And as a result, ended up with all these different mental complications, okay? So my point is, there are times where we need to accept that I have failed, and I need to seek that other path that makes more sense for me. And this will not happen to everybody, it will happen to some of us. But if we don't recognize that there is nothing wrong with that point in my life where I have failed, we make it such a negative experience that it almost reduces your chances of success going forward. And everything is buried into that. So I will tell my 15-year-old, be ready for that. We will talk about what it takes to overcome failure, what it takes to be prepared for it mentally. And a lot of success comes from how strong you are mentally. I mean, look, there are people that are endowed with all sorts of, I guess, trust funds and have money and have all these different things that allows them to succeed by doing very little. That's not who I am, and some of us are not that way. So this statement is to the average person who doesn't have all those things. What do you do to succeed? You create the success, but you can only create it by going through the journey. And that journey has a lot of rough patches, a lot of trip-ups, changes of direction sometimes, but ultimately, don't just give up because you're struggling. The point of failure is beyond your first 2 or 3 barriers of struggles, but at some point, you might have to accept that I need a change of tactic, and I have the resolve to do that. So that's what I'll tell my 15 and 17-year-old. Thank you. Now, to the question on how do you work with a team that has been handed to you, and you created a constraint that you can't change the team. Now, I don't think that's a pragmatic constraint. I do think you may have some limitations on what you can change and not change, but you certainly can make changes. But that's not the first point of call, right? So I do like the constraint because, again, I've seen too many leaders who make decisions based on I like you and therefore you're on my team. I don't like you, so you're not on my team. again, we're not going to go far if that's our approach to life, right? So that's not a criteria for building a team. You don't have to like people for you to have them on your team. In fact, that's the most irrelevant criteria for setting up a team, okay? So when I went to Haiti, I inherited a business that was in decline. It was the largest business of the company I was working for, and for 3 years, 2 years to 3 years, it hadn't been doing too well. And my task as a rookie CEO, that's my first CEO job, was to turn this thing around and bring it back to growth. Of course, when you have a turnaround situation, the first thing you think about, and it happens a lot, there are people who have armies of teams. You go into a turnaround situation, and then you change 70, 80% of management, bring in your own people who you trust, who you've worked with, who understand how you work. When you snap your finger, they know what it means. When you do it twice, they know what it means, and then you start going, okay? I've never done this in my career. I've always worked what I get. I build people to a different level of productivity, and I make sure, to a large extent, I'm building from within. That has been what appeals to me, because my philosophy of life appeals to that. Basically, everybody has a talent in them. And the fact that that talent didn't shine under person A or under environment A does not mean that it cannot shine under person B or environment B. So when I go into a new role, I always make sure that I give everybody a new chance, because things can be markedly different. And I have seen people who have done really well because of a change in environment principles and even the influence you have on the way people think, right? I mean, I don't accept certain things on my team. Okay, like I said, when I have a team, we have to support each other. So if I see someone who's very selfish, I'll call them out. And more often than not, these people change. People tell me, I don't know what you've done with this person, but they've changed. They're completely different. Why? Because everybody has consciousness in them. And sometimes it just takes something very specific to bring that consciousness out of them so that they can apply their minds, apply the empathy that they have. This will work, 99 out of 100 times. I don't think people are born as terrible people or bad people. People end up being the way they are based on what they see around them, based on what's made acceptable around them, and also based on their experiences. But all of these can be managed. And more often than not, you can get a lot of good out of people. Like I said before, I'm a very development-oriented leader. And one of the things I try to do is to build my teams by instilling a lot of knowledge from my own experiences. I do classes, I teach, I do whiteboard sessions. I'm constantly doing it. That's the way I lead, because if I enable you with the right tools, the difference may be I had exposure to certain tools that you haven't had exposure to. By enabling you to have the same exposure to the same tools, by teaching you, you should be able to do the things that I need you to do at the level of quality that is required. And again, more often than not, this has happened. And that's how I've managed to come into companies or into teams where I've inherited a whole team and I've had to work with the team I had. I was very successful in Haiti, but I worked with the team that I had. And when I left Haiti, when I was leaving Haiti and I looked at what the team had become, I mean, it was a moment of pride. And when we talk about legacy for me, I look back and I think, you know what? Today, that team, about my commercial team, for example, a large number of them ended up going up to the group level to help the other markets to continue to grow. And I look back and I feel a lot of pride because they are doing something else with what I was able to enable them. And that continuity, for me, is really where the legacy comes. And it's a mindset, it's a way of work. You're able to bring out the passion in someone. That's legacy. It's not all these other things that everyone else is fixated about, But for me, it's really transforming people and creating the multiplier effect from each of these individuals on other people. and making sure that that world that we all sit in becomes a much better place because you touched one person and that one person touched 10 people and each of those 10 touch another 10. And then you get this multiply effect that transcends generations of workforces that allows us to continue to grow. And if you have that mindset, I'm telling you, a lot of people who you would declare as dead on arrival in a team will rise up and start producing things you never imagined possible. And I've seen that happen several times. So, thank you.
Wow. 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 Give it up. Give it up. Continue to clap for my only boss. Now I'm not calling you Selorm again. My only boss. So much. I mean, we have a presentation to make, and I'll call upon Dr. Sena to help us make the presentation. Or Dr. Tego, maybe you would have to help us, if possible. Okay.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. You may have your seat here. Thank you very much. Please. No. Let me help. Are you fine? Let me help. A round of applause for Selorm again. No, my boss. My boss. Selorm's two main purposes: be the voice for those without a voice, apply my talents and ambition to serve my country. According to Selorm, when he is employing, he looks out for people who can adapt to the future and high on productivity. And finally, transitioning too early is not advisable. So for me, if you've been with ACT for 5 years, it's too short. Don't transition. At this point, I want to give the vote of thanks. Our distinguished guest, Selorm Adadevoh, faculty, students and organizers of Academic City University's Path of Purpose. On behalf of everyone present here, I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to you, Selorm, for sharing your inspiring insights and experience with us. I must say, your thought-provoking presentation has undoubtedly sparked a new reflection amongst us and perspectives on our path to purpose. Your passion for empowering others and your commitment to making a positive impact are truly admirable. We are grateful for the time you took off your busy schedule to join us here. And for the valuable lessons you've impacted. Thanks for being a role model and for helping us navigate our path to purpose. We are grateful and we are honored to have had you as a guest. Once again, thank you, Selorm Adadevoh, for your enlightening presence here at Academic City University. We look forward to seeing the ripple effect on whatever you've taught us here. We are grateful. Thank you very much. Please, it is time for a group photo. So I want everyone to come on stage. Yeah.
At Academic City, we are not just students. We are problem solvers, innovators, and future-ready leaders. We power the future and create groundbreaking technologies ready to tackle real-world challenges head-on. In a world driven by technology, we shape the digital landscape, transforming challenges into opportunities. At the core of strategic thinking and decision-making, we thrive in the dynamic realm of commerce. We evolve into leaders who not only speak, but stand for what's right, forging narratives and stirring the conscience of the world. Embark on a journey with us, where innovation meets education. Academic City, educating future-ready leaders.